This video is going to be on estimating the mean from grouped data. Now, if estimating the mean or group data are unfamiliar terms, don't worry, hopefully by the end of the video you might be a bit more familiar with them. First, we need some group data to estimate. I've done this table earlier and I'm going to now make up a question based on it. This would be very similar to the type of question you might get in the exam. Okay, a survey is done of a group of Premier League players recording how many goals they scored in a season. The table below records the data. Now here's the critical bit. Work out an estimate for the mean number of goals scored. It's those key words that really matter. Work out an estimate for the mean. An estimate for the mean. Now you might be wondering, why can't we just find out the mean? Why do we have to estimate? The reason is that these 21 players, for example, we don't know whether they scored 0 goals, 2 goals, 1 goal, 3 goals or 4 goals. These inequality signs, they mean that G, which is the number of goals, could be 0, or they could be 1 or 2 or anything in between 0 and 4. The little equals just means could be equal to. So G could be equal to 0, is greater than 0, but has to be less than or equal to 4. So we have to estimate. We don't know exactly how many goals these 21 players scored. What would you estimate for the number of goals that they did score though? What you need to do, and sometimes in the exam you'll be given an extra column in which to do this, but if you're not, you can simply draw one. What you need to do is find the midpoint. The midpoint of 0 to 4. Here we go. What is the midpoint of 0 to 4? If you're not sure, you can add the two numbers up and then divide by 2. 4 plus 0 is 4, and 4 divided by 2 is 2. So the midpoint is 2. What about the midpoint between 9 and 5? 9 plus 5 is 14. 14 divided by 2 is 7. The midpoint of 10 and 14 is 12. The midpoint between 15 and 19 is 17. The midpoint between 20 and 30 is 25. And between 31 and 45, I would use that trick. 31 plus 45 is 76. 76 divided by 2 would be 38. Notice, by the way, how the groups were different sizes. Like this first group was only between 0 and 4, so if you like 4 wide, whereas the last group was between 31 and 45. It was quite a massive group, so be very careful when you're finding the midpoint. Okay, fair enough, we found the midpoint, but I thought to estimate the mean, or I thought to get the mean, what we needed to do was add them all up and divide by how many? That's what I've been taught to do to get the mean. Add them all up and divide by how many? And that is exactly what we're actually going to do. The thing is, these 21 players, on average they scored 2 goals as an estimate. So what we could do is 2 plus 2 plus 2 plus 2 plus 2, etc., etc., 21 times. But wouldn't you agree that's a really quite long and boring process to do? How about the shortcut for adding them all up of just doing 21 times by 2? That'll add them all up, all 21 of them, very quickly. So what you do is you invent another column. Again, sometimes they'll give you this column, and sometimes you'll just have to draw it on yourself. This column will be for multiplying the frequency 21 by 2 instead of doing 2 plus 2 plus 2 plus 2, etc. 21 times. Okay, so midpoint times by frequency. The midpoint is 2. 2 times by 21 is 42. Same thing for all the rest of them. We're going to do the frequency multiplied by the midpoint. 25 times by 7 is 175. Let's write that in here. 15 times by 12 would be 180. These calculations you can either do in the calculator, or if it's a non-calculator paper you can take your time and multiply using the grid method or whichever method you prefer. 17 times by 12, I just do 17 times by 10 and 17 times by 2 and then add them together. That would be 204. 25 times by 6 would be 150. And 38 times by 1, that's a nice one, is 38. Now what about this adding them all up and dividing by how many? Well, in a sense we have added them all up. We've done 2 plus 2 plus 2 21 times, and that gets us 42. 7 plus 7 plus 7 25 times, and that's got us 175. All we need to do now is add all of these up. So let's add them all up, and for that I am going to cheat. There we go, adding all these guys up. 180, 204, 150, and 38. 789. Let's just write that down here. We have indeed added them all up. Now we need to divide by how many? What do you reckon we're going to divide by? So many students would tell me divide by 6 because there are 6 numbers here, or divide by 6 because there's 6 rows. But actually remember, there were this many players. There were 21 players here, 25 players here. We were actually doing 2 plus 2 plus 2 plus 2 plus 2 21 times, and 7 plus 7 plus 7 25 times. There are way more than just 6 players. In fact, if we did divide by 6, we would have 131 as an estimate for the mean number of goals scored. Not even Messi could score that many goals in a season. So it's not divide by 6. Always check whether your answer kind of makes sense. It's divide by how many players there are. How many players are there in total? Often you'll be told how many in the question, but if not, as in here, we need to add them up. 21 players plus 25 plus 15 plus 12 plus 6 plus 1 is 80. So there were actually 80 players. We're now finally ready to do what we always do with the mean, which is after we've added them all up, divide by how many? 789 divided by 80 is 9.86. So to 2 decimal places, that's 9.86. And that kind of makes sense, doesn't it? Because roughly in the middle of this would be about 10 goals. It's a slightly lower number than bang in the middle, but that's because it's harder to score more goals than 30 and things like that. So 9.86 makes a lot more sense than 131. There we go, we've estimated the mean. A quick recap of how we did that. We got the midpoint of each of these groups, and that's why it's called estimating the mean from grouped data. Once we had the midpoint of each of the groups, we multiplied the midpoints by the frequencies, because there were 21 players who scored on average 2 goals. So instead of doing 2 plus 2, etc., we just did 21 times by 2. Then we added the totals, because after all, when you do the mean, you add them all up. And after we've added them all up, we divided by how many. But that doesn't mean we divide by how many rows, so we divide by 6. We divide by how many players, which we found out by adding all the frequencies. 789, which was this total, divided by 80 was 9.86. And that is how you estimate the mean.